breathe 20,000 breaths a day, right? And that's every single breath that you're either triggering something or you're not triggered, like every single breath.
A topic that continually comes up in my private community, as well as in my comments and emails, is mold. And it's something that I've talked about here on the podcast before, and that I will definitely continue to talk about. But when it comes to testing your home, understanding what types of tests actually work and don't work can be extremely confusing. That's why I've brought on Brian from We Inspect, and we're going to talk about some very simple and easy things that you can do at home before calling in a larger testing group. We're going to also talk about some faulty testing methods that a lot of people fall for, and then understanding remediation, because that's a whole other confusing topic that needs to be talked about more. We are also doing a giveaway for my listeners for his dust test. Now, if you listen to this and decide you want to go ahead and get a dust test for your home, I will put a link down in the show notes for you so you can go ahead and get one of those. But from May the 14th through the 24th, we're going to give away one dust test to a listener. It tests for over 32 different species of mold, and that also will come with a phone call consultation to go over your results. So if you listen to the podcast and you're interested in learning more and entering the contest, head down to the link in the show notes and enter. I hope you enjoyed this episode and find it helpful and informative, and I'll talk to you again soon. In the world of weight loss supplements, hacks, peptides, biohacks, and gadgets, one thing that's still not getting enough airtime, in my opinion, is the impact of artificial light at night on your metabolism. Now, there's actual ample scientific research to show that not enough light in the mornings and too much light at night actually slows down your metabolic rate. This is why I choose Viva Rays to be my go-to source for blue blockers. I absolutely love the quality of their glasses, and I have a spectrometer and have measured to see that they actually block the amount of blue light that they say they do. So if you're looking for a pair of high-quality blue blocking glasses to support your metabolism, your health, your mood, and your sleep, check out Viva Rays and use the code YOGI to save 15%. It's vivarays.com and use the code YOGI to save 15%. Thank you to Viva Rays for sponsoring today's podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm excited to have Brian here with me from We Inspect. We're going to talk about mold, and I know he has another company where you can do some investigative stuff in your home, which we'll talk about today. But Brian, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole topic of mold is something I've talked about on the show before. We have a little story with my daughter. We actually pulled her from a school after she started having grand mal seizures and a lot of complicated health issues, and refused basically to send her back to that school. And I know there was mold in there because I could smell it when I was in the building. But of course, they never tested and wouldn't acknowledge it. So yeah, I think it's a big problem for people, and it can cause some pretty complex health issues. So where do you want to start? I want to start with all of this.
Well, first, was she better when you pulled her out? Did it help?
It's been a long journey. She's a pretty complicated kid. She's got non-speaking autism as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to get the seizures to stop by pulling her from the school. It took a few months. She was out of that school for 6 months. And we've been doing things like hydrogen inhalation therapy. We've done a lot of things to get her so that she hasn't had a seizure since November of 2023, knock on wood. So it's
amazing.
No more seizures. But we had done a test with Vibrant Labs,
Mm-hmm.
and it showed high levels of mold for her. And then none of us had it. So I'm like, it's the school. So
It's interesting. I just on my podcast had Dr. Pejman Katarai, excuse me. He's a pediatric mold focused practitioner in Santa Monica. So he works with a lot of kids, and he specializes in autism and PANS kids specifically.
yes, you use PANDAS. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you should. This guy, I mean, Dr. Katter is a genius. I've been working with his patients for a long time. And so anyways, I had him on my podcast recently, and he said something in there just made me think when you said that. He said that, like, from what he's seen, he thinks 50% of kids' autism is mold toxicity. That's what he thinks it is.
Interesting.
It's like a huge component to a lot of these like more complex health issues, not just in kids, but in adults too.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times what happens is, you breathe in mold or you get, whatever's going on and it triggers an immune response. But everyone's body is different. So like
Right.
how the symptom manifests becomes very different in multiple, in different individuals. And so when you go to like a traditional doctor, they're like, hey, I'm dealing with X, Y, or Z, right? And the symptoms are like can be any system in your body, anything that's going on. So it could be neurological, nervous system, gut, skin, like, all these different areas. And a lot of times it's, oh, well, take this, take that, take this to like work towards symptom. And it gets really confusing because mold isn't like a very easy, like, oh, this is your symptom, this is what you have, right? It's not like I banged my knee and I have a bruise on my knee. Like that's very simple, right? Uh, it's complex. And so without a very specific sort of like checklist for a doctor to go down and say, oh, this is mold, it gets overlooked all the time. It's
Oh
all
yeah.
the time. And it's just like a constant story of people
Yeah.
that we hear.
Yeah. Yeah, and I get a lot of people in my community that are worried about mold or have had past mold exposures. They're recovering from it. I think it's being talked about a lot more these days. So I think there's more awareness of it, but how to deal with it, what to do about it with her. It was like, I had a person come inspect our home. Of course, you're always going to find a little something. We found a little something in our HVAC, took care of that, installed a bunch of expensive equipment. Now we've got air purifiers, everything all over the house, dehumidifiers. We stay on top of it. Um, but it can be really daunting, I think, for people to think, oh, maybe it's mold. And I see that on social media. Oh, it's mold. You posted under somebody's post with a complex health issue, it's mold. And it's like, okay, so what does someone even do about that? Because I think people just get super freaked out about it and they shut down.
Yeah, and it's a really common reaction for that because you're dealing with something one you can't see.
Right.
And so like imagine walking in somewhere and you're blindfolded and then someone just punches you in the face. You have no idea where it's coming from.
Right.
Like that's what it's like, right? And so then you would have this crazy fear of walking into that room now every time because who knows where the punch is coming from, right?
Right.
And so
Right.
it's this very weird, like I can't see it, but I'm now getting this anxiety about this thing I can't see, and I don't know what path to take because my normal sort of way of evaluating danger doesn't work here, right?
Mhm.
And that's a really common thing. And it's a lot of, what I spend my time trying to talk with people about is sort of how you think through this stuff, how you attack it, how you kind of go into it. And the one thing like very big picture on this, which I've learned over the years, and when I first started doing this, I wasn't really on this side of the fence, and then I've kind of learned it over time that yes, and it's when I first got into this, I thought that if you're exposed to anything, that I thought you had to have zero exposure for somebody to get better, right? And that was kind of where I thought that you needed to be. And then over time, I started seeing my clients and like patients from doctors I'm friends with and all these people, they would start getting better
Mhm.
and they weren't necessarily getting rid of everything that we found in their house, right?
Right.
And so it really started to kind of like crystallize for me that it's not so much about like this zero sum game. It's
Yeah.
really about like trying to understand where are the most significant problems in the house and then how do we essentially apply like an 80/20 concept to it and say, hey, these are the 4, 5, 6 worst things that are going on in this space. If we remove these down, you'll get down a big chunk. And it's less about like I have to go to zero. It's more about like understanding like who's the most sensitive person in the house. And for those listening who don't have video, because I use my hands a lot, imagine a scale of like 1 to 10 for sensitivity, right? And so let's say that or how much mold someone can be exposed to before their immune triggers, right? And so let's say
Right.
that the most sensitive person in your house is like at a 5, let's say. So like they can handle 5. If it gets over 5, their body starts freaking out and it's not good for them, right? Well, say your house is an 8. Okay. So
Right.
you are effectively every time that you breathe, you're going back to that punch in the face analogy, you're literally getting punched in the face with every breath that you take in that house, right? And so this is why these health issues they go on, they start spreading to different systems in the body. It's like you literally don't have a chance to recover. It's like being in a fight and never getting a break,
Hmm.
And so the goal is like, do I have to get my 8 level of exposure down to 0? Not necessarily. Can I get my 8 down to like a 4 or a 3 if I can handle a 5? Now your body can like breathe for a second. Your nervous system can reset for a second. You can go from sympathetic back to parasympathetic for a minute, which is going to allow your body to kind of rest and sort of get in that recovery state. And then you work with your practitioners who help to start build your resilience and help to
That's
push your
important.
5, yeah,
Yeah.
to a 6 or a 7, right? And you start working them in opposite directions. And so I've seen this happen over and over again. I've seen kids who are, I had this kid that we worked with a long time ago, moves into this house in the Northeast. He was 9 years old. He was like playing, sports and stuff as a kid, moves into this house within months, is wheelchair ridden. Once
Wow.
he
Oh
moves
my
into this
God.
house, is working through different doctors trying to figure out what's going on. Gets to a doctor who knows us and who knows mold specifically, and she's like, and she does the testing and stuff. She's like, dude, there's a mold problem here. We
Mhm.
come in, find out, what's going on. The bulk of it was in the HVAC system with a couple other areas. They don't gut their entire house. They
Mhm.
fix their HVAC system and handle a couple of the areas where he spends the most time. And less than a year later, he's up again, being a kid again, right? And so I just see these things happen all the time.
Mhm.
And I just want people to know that like it's possible for that to happen. And it's also if you're in a situation where you're trying to heal from something, or you have, so examples, autoimmune issues,
Mhm.
PANDAS, autism, Lyme disease, chronic inflammatory conditions like, you might hear like fibromyalgia or different things like that. Those are just like chronic inflammatory issues that nobody can diagnose, so they put a label on
Right.
them, right?
They don't really
Any
mean anything.
They don't mean anything. It allows them to prescribe you something. But
Exactly.
if you have these things going on with you or somebody in your family, like the environment is such a huge thing that you need to check off the list. I'm not saying that it's always that, but like it can be a big piece of it. And
Yep.
it's easy to check off the list from like a screening perspective. And
Yep.
then if you dive into it more, you can really figure out what's going on and make pretty dramatic health increases or improvements.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's like a holistic approach that people need. You've got to get rid of the issue. And you also have to build resiliency in the body. I think both of those things are important. And I always tell people if you are living in mold, you got to get out, or you have to figure out some remediation.
Mhm.
But you also have to say, what's going on? My mitochondria allowed mold to come in this way. When everyone else around me, their mitochondria didn't. It means we need to work at the root a little bit more. So that's why I love hydrogen, and is like one of my favorite things, because that's like a low side effect way to strengthen the mitochondria and to build more resilience in the cell. So that's something we've implemented, and it's been tremendously helpful because my
Very cool.
so sensitive to detoxes and supplements. It's just like you can't. So that's been helpful. But yeah, I just want to reiterate that, because I think people get very stuck in like um mold is a boogeyman and you have to be zero, like you said, zero exposure, and just like you freak out. And it's like we have to get rid of the main issue, yes. And you also have to look at these other things in your lifestyle, and building resiliency of your body as well, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I feel like the anxiety, I feel like anxiety comes from the unknown.
Mhm. It is absolutely, yeah.
And so if you're in a situation and you're not sure like where it is or what to do about it or anything like that, then I feel like that's really like the gateway where anxiety can really like kind of come in and start rooting its ugly roots in you with the anxiety component of things. Whereas if you're like, yeah, this is going on, I understand it. Like when you are able to kind of create like a framework in your mind around how I do this and what I do and where it is, then not to say you won't be anxious about it, but I think that it reduces that a little bit because at least you feel like you have a path on what you need to do and it's a proven path that's worked. And
Yeah.
when I find that people are most anxious, it's really because they just don't have information or they just don't
Right.
really know what to do next. And so I feel like that's where, I try to be, as helpful as I can be in conversations like this. It's like, how do we calm that down and give you some ways to like think through things to understand like how it's a problem, right? Because most people, you don't walk in your house and there's mold all over the place. It's
No, you don't.
actually almost never like that.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, well, then how do I know? Right. And then this becomes the first question that all the anxiety, it's behind everywhere. It's everywhere. It's coming
Yeah.
after me.
Rip down
Right.
all the walls. Do I need to just
Yeah.
burn the house down? Like, yeah. I think that's
Yeah.
fear for people. And then you start to fear, like having the anxiety of like being in your home and like, oh my gosh, is this hidden evil thing behind my walls? What do I do? Right.
Yeah. So I'd love to like, I mean, if we could talk through that a little bit, like, and say, hey, how do we understand it a little better? How do we reduce that feeling a little more? I think would be cool.
Yeah.
Um, so a couple of the like misconceptions around this, which to kind of set the stage. The first thing is you 90% of the time are not going to see mold somewhere. So a lot of times what happens, and I think this is actually part of what drives towards this anxiety a little bit for people, is that they'll have like a local mold inspector come in their house or something, and they'll come in and they'll do what they call like air quality testing, and they'll do like an air sample in the middle of a room.
Mm-hmm.
Well, air samples in the middle of rooms give you false negatives almost 80% of the time that you run that test.
Thing. Oh,
And it's because the mold isn't growing in the middle of the room.
right. Exactly.
It's behind a wall, it's in a ceiling, it's under this cabinet, it's wherever it is. And the important thing is it's really similar with like medical testing. And once you like frame it like, oh, I make sense. Like let's say you were testing for mycotoxins, like you mentioned, right?
Mhm.
You're not going to do that in a saliva test, for
No,
example. That's the
no,
wrong test.
right.
So it'd be the equivalent of me coming in your house and saying, I'm going to test for this thing, and I'm just going to use the complete wrong test to do that. And then I'm going to tell you off of this result that everything is fine because this test literally won't tell me if it's there. And
Right.
so what happens to a lot of people is they'll have some, it's so easy to get into becoming a mold inspector. Like it takes nothing. And the industry is so behind on like like the right way to do this, that this is why there's a lot of people out there saying that, it's the Wild West and like you can't trust anything and it's hard, right? So air testing in the middle of the room for a year, like I've known this for a long time, obviously, but for a year when I went into houses, what I would do is like if I thought there was mold like in a wall, growing behind a wall, and I'll talk through like how I look at those because I think it'll help people. But if I thought there was mold growing behind a wall, I would actually test in the wall because you want to test where you think it is, not far away, right? I would test in the wall. But then what I did is I took like 3 steps away and I put an air sample pump up in the same place that like a normal inspector would put a pump in the middle of a room. And 78% of the time, the air sample pump said there was no problem when there was a problem in the wall.
Mm,
And the problem is you're moving that sample further and further away from where the problem is. So you're diluting the air effectively from where the source of it is all the way to where you're trying to collect the test. You're going to get a much more accurate read right where the problem is, as opposed to 10 feet away in the middle of a room. And the flip on that is that everybody's like, well, if it's not in your air, then you're not breathing it. And it's actually not true at all. It's the idea of when you take an air sample in the middle of a room, there's a lot of variables working against you.
mm,
What's floating in the air at that point in time? How long are you taking the sample for? Was there a little kid jumping around in the room before you walked in there, or was there not, right? You're effectively trying to like grab things out of the air that are constantly moving and not always the same, right? So the idea here is that when you test, you want to test in a way that's going to show you the origin point, like where is it coming from? Because if you don't know where it's coming from, you can't fix it. And that's like the biggest thing. So if somebody takes an air sample in the middle of the room, 22% of the time it came up like there was a problem, right? The opposite of the 78. So then the question is, well, what do I do to fix this? And you go ask that inspector, well, where is it coming from? And
mm.
they're going to say, it's in here somewhere, probably, because they're not going to know where it's coming from because it doesn't grow in the air. Mold doesn't grow in the air. It
Right.
moves in the air. Air pushes it around, right?
Mm,
So their answer is going to be somewhere in here, maybe. Or they'll say, maybe it's your air conditioning system. That way they don't have to look at it and they can blame it on something that isn't in the room, right?
mm,
And so
Mhm.
then what they're going to tell you is like, okay, cool. So we're going to do this fog in your room, this magic fogging solution that's going to just solve all of your problems. And it's going to kill all the mold, it's get behind the walls, and do all this stuff, and it's going to be better. And it doesn't work. It 100% doesn't work. And every single time that somebody does that, they start having symptoms again within a month because all that fog did was bring what was floating down to the ground level to the surface. And then once you start moving around the house, it starts popping up in your face again. The visual and like the analogy people can use to kind of like imagine this is imagine there's like an oil rig in the ocean and the oil rig leaks. Okay. So now in the ocean, you get all the black oil getting into the ocean, right? And then you have like all the little ducks and the fish, they're all covered in it, and they're cleaning them with Dawn soap and all that stuff, right? And so you have to stop the oil leak, right? And so you go in and you stop the oil leak. Yet all the oil is still in the ocean. And so they're still impacted by everything that's going on, right? And if you don't clean the ocean afterwards, they're still going to be impacted. And that analogy flips the other way too. So what I was just explaining was the flip of that. You have the oil rig, the oil is leaking. You come in and clean the oil out of the ocean real quick, and then the oil just floods the ocean again. And those fish and those ducks get sick again and they get covered in oil again. So the first thing is you have to know where it's coming from. And that's like kind of the big secret around this whole thing is like how to identify where it's coming from. And then the second thing you need to know is how it's moving into your space and how you're being exposed to it, which is a combination of HVAC system and what's called settlement on surfaces in the house, which is like dust essentially settling on surfaces. So the interesting thing about this is like if I'm not going to do an air test in the middle of a room, then how do I know if I'm being exposed to something if I'm not going to rip open all my walls, right? Well, there's a number of research studies that talk about the idea of dust being the accumulation point for all kinds of toxins and bacteria and particle and all kinds of things in your house. And it's a much better understanding of what's going on in your space because you remove all the variability of what's floating, what's moving. Was my kid jumping around in here? Like, is my air pump pulling for only a couple minutes or not, right? If you could take a dust collection sample from from the ground, from the top of a table, like horizontal surfaces in a space, you now have an understanding of what gravity has been bringing it down to these surfaces over a period of time, and that's what you're breathing because the connection to that is something called the human cloud effect, which basically means as you walk through a space in any home or any building, you're constantly popping up particle that is settled down on surfaces. So, like you sit in your chair, you bump your table, you sit on your bed, you do whatever, particle pops up in the air. That particle is now in your breathing zone, and that's your direct exposure to pathway. Or your direct pathway to exposure. So the way that like the formula works is you have a source like behind a wall, let's say. Airflow pulls spores fragments out from behind the wall through different pathways, like within the building envelope. It settles down on surfaces and like the dust reservoirs. And then as you walk around, you pop it right back up into your face and you breathe it. And this is the path on how you're exposed. So if that is your path and there's two steps to the path, step one is where it's growing and originating. Step two is how it's popping up in your face and you're breathing it. Then you have to get to the first step first, and then you have to clean up the second step second. This is this like holistic view of how you look at a house and how you remediate a house is how people get better. And this is
Mhm.
what we've seen many, many times.
Do you think a lot of times it, like you said, is in the HVAC? Do you find it more in walls, or like what are the most common areas that you're really finding being problematic for people?
It's a good question, and it's a combination of them, right?
Mhm.
So, like, a home is a living system,
Right.
meaning that if there's something in one place, I joke around like this with clients sometimes, but I'm like, if there's mold in this room that I'm sitting in right now, my house doesn't know that the floor plan, the blueprint put a door right here. It doesn't know
Right.
that.
Right.
The air doesn't stop at this door because this is the end of my room and then the hallway starts next. Like the house doesn't know that. So
Right.
like if you've ever opened a door and like a door shut somewhere else by itself, right? It's not like the house is haunted. It's that the airflow is connected through the whole house. And so there's a pressure change. So really what happens is not so much that like there's only one area where it happens. It's there's a number of areas where things can happen, and then they migrate and move, and they can impact other areas. So then the key is to then understand, how do I figure out where the source origin points are, is the first piece. And then the second piece is you always have to evaluate the air conditioning system, because it's like the circulatory system of the house. It sucks it in and spreads it out. So you have to look at that and understand if it's impacted and if it can be cleaned, or like how you address it. And then you have to know what's settling on surfaces, kind of what we talked about. So when it comes to like, well, how do we know where it is? The biggest misconception, I think, in our industry is that if there's not water, there can't be mold. And
Mhm.
this is like what all these inspectors are going to come in and tell you. They're like, oh, it's dry. You can't have a mold problem here. And it's like such a disservice to people. And it actually blows my mind that they say these things to people, because this is what keeps people more sick, is because they have somebody who they think is an expert, who has 5 stars on Yelp and whatever, who comes in and says, oh, well, there's no water. There can't be mold here. And it's just crazy. So here's how this works. Mold grows because it does need water to grow, right? So that part is true. Mold needs moisture, water to grow. It doesn't need water to stay, right? So think about your yard, think about the grass, right? You water the grass grows. What happens when you stop watering the grass? The grass doesn't disappear. It doesn't pack up its bags and go look for another sprinkler system. That's not what
Right.
it does. It stays there. It becomes dry. The blades of grass can break apart in half now really easily, as opposed to not breaking as easily. When the water dries, the mold moves through the house even more, because the entire colony is so dry, it shatters into millions of pieces and it breaks throughout the entire house when the airflow changes. And so a lot of what gets missed in these inspections is they're only using like a moisture meter or an infrared camera, and that's all they're doing. They're like, oh, if there's no moisture and there's no infrared camera issues, and you don't have mold problems. 90% of probably what we find roughly in a house, no moisture, no infrared issues, but there was like bubbling paint on a wall, which could indicate maybe moisture impacted that area at some point in time. There's uh, in a cabinet, like the floor of the cabinet where you set your products, it's stained, it's buckled, something's a little off there. It's dry right now.
Mhm.
um, Staining, chipping, peeling, bubbling paint, rust, like these things are indicators that moisture was impacting the space at a time in the past. A lot of times what happens is people will have a water leak or something, and not like a flood. This is the other thing. It's not just floods. It's my garbage disposal dripped for a few days and it got the bottom of my sink cabinet wet. So I fixed the garbage disposal and I let the cabinet dry out.
Mhm.
Well, mold could have grown under the whole bottom side of that cabinet in that amount of time, and you wouldn't see any of it. And
Mhm.
so, how we go through the house is we look for these signs of water damage. This is the big kind of secret to this: is when you do an inspection, when you do a mold inspection, you actually shouldn't be looking for mold at all. You should be looking for signs of previous water damage. You will
Mhm.
see the mold, right? You'll see it, right? That, like, if you're going through this path, but if you take a step back and you look for signs of historical or previous water intrusion, a little stain, a baseboard pulling off a wall a little bit, a little buckle somewhere, a little bow in something, bubbling, peeling, like these types of things, that's where we test in a wall, for example. That's where we test in a cabinet, in a ceiling. And that's where we find that there's so many hidden mold problems that come from those things, because moisture was there, mold grew, moisture went away, mold stayed, right? And so the concept here isn't about like where does it happen the most? Like, it can happen in many places, right? The thing is, where are the worst issues? Where's the biggest mold concentrations? And then how do we focus on those in remediation to reduce the largest amount of exposure, so you can get that exposure level down below what the threat, like the minimum threshold is of the most sensitive person in the house.
Got it. And so what what does someone do? Do they have to move out? Like, what does that even look like?
Like for the remediation process?
Mhm.
I mean, it depends. Sometimes if it's not a lot that's going on, then maybe somebody can stay, right? But if you're coming in
Yeah.
and finding, a number of things, or maybe it's in like key areas of the house that you can't really maneuver around, like if your kitchen's impacted, I mean, what are you gonna do without your kitchen and a bathroom potentially, those types of things.
Yeah.
Generally, I would like people to be out of the house when remediation is happening, because when remediation occurs, you're disturbing a bunch, right? You're taking things out, a wall comes out
All like
here.
everything can
Yeah.
get worse, right?
Yeah, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Now they're containing things, right? So they're putting up like big plastic clean rooms and stuff to try to keep it in there, which they need to be doing.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you can avoid being in that place for a couple of weeks while that's happening, I would much rather prefer that, to allow them to make that disruption happen, to do what they need to do, clean it all, get it kind of back to where it needs to be before you come in.
Got it. And I guess the biggest thing, with my daughter was like the seizures were a huge indicator. And she had also gained like a large amount of weight. And I was like,
Mhm.
what is going on?
That's
Uh,
a big one.
yeah, it is a big one. And I
Yeah.
think I hate to say it, but I think it's getting people more interested in this topic when they're having issues with weight loss, because I talk about leptin resistance all the time. Like that's my huge topic, is leptin resistance. And mold can create a situation where you do become leptin resistant to an extent. And so I think that's when people are like, what's going on with me? I'm gaining all this weight, or and I can't lose it. Um, is it mold? Is it mold? And
Mhm.
that's a very interesting one that I think people are coming about on. But my daughter, when we got her body in a more resilient place, like she's lost like, I want to say like 46 pounds now. She's like tiny now. And we didn't really make any huge dietary changes with her. It was more of like making her body more resilient, and the weight came off and getting her out of that school with all the mold. So um what kind of stuff do you see as far as health issues that might be going? I know that it's all over the map and person dependent, but I'd love to hear some common ones.
Yeah, I mean it really is like all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it so hard, right? So like from the brain, it's brain fog, it's memory issues. Those are some common ones there. Gut issues are really big.
Mm-hmm.
And then gut then connects to the brain. Once you start having gut issues, that then create, now you got the gut brain axis that's going on, and how that impacts the brain. So you could have that going on. Um, Skin issues is a big one. So when you start seeing stuff happening on your skin, right, it's like your body's not able to get things out in other ways. It starts manifesting like towards the skin. Um,
Yeah.
Mast cell activation is a really big one. So
The big
now,
people are always talking about these days.
yeah, well, it's interesting. The mast cell is kind of the connection between like brain issues too, because when you breathe through your nose, right, you then are triggering mast cell responses, which is essentially histamine responses for those that aren't like fully aware. And that's all happening right up in here. And so that can then affect the connection to the brain as well. Fatigue is a big one. Just so general fatigue across the way. Hair loss is a big one. Tinnitus is something. I'm trying to think of like everything now that people talk to me about. There's so many. Um,
Meningitis was one that's interesting.
yeah, that's like the ear ringing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's one.
Familiar with that one.
Yeah, there's what's interesting is that I actually feel like it's less about which is the specific symptom, because I literally, like, if I sat down and wrote them all down, I could probably find something for every single system in the body and find multiple
Mhm.
things. Like you start getting into like reproduction issues like PCOS, like all that, there's like connections to that to mold. So now you're talking reproductive system, nervous system, gut, neurological system, skin, hair loss, weight gain, so your metabolic system, like literally all over the place, right? So what I would say, instead of trying to get so specific into like, is this symptom a mold thing? Because it's not really a straight line like that. Instead, I would ask the question, are you having symptoms in different systems of your body all kind of at the same time? So like, am I having brain fog and something else? Am I having like, or is somebody else in my house having different ones? This is the other thing too. It's not just
Yeah.
you, but because everyone's going to respond differently, you might have certain people in the house where their body's triggering, I don't know, maybe like your kids might be more eczema focused or something like that, right? On like what's happening with them. One other person might be more brain fog focused. Somebody else might be more like just heavy fatigue, lethargic, like something like that, right? And so you could have, if you're looking at the people in the space, and you're seeing different symptoms across all of them, across different systems of the body, then that's a big trigger, right? I would say another big red flag is if you've been trying to figure something out for a while and like the doctors aren't figuring it out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then environment's another really big, red flag around that too.
Yeah.
And like it's such an easy thing to check off of the list. So like we were talking about inspections, right? But like if you're like, oh hey, this Brian guy, he just like mentioned like, yeah, my so and so has this feeling and my daughter has this and I have this. It seems like, what can I do? So there's a test that we created called the dust test.
Mm.
And that's like a screening test for your house. That's literally like basically a Swiffer type of cloth where you collect dust throughout the house and it gets analyzed and it shows you like the load of mold that there is in your house. And if your load is high, then that's telling you you have stuff in your house that's contributing to that, right? So you could do this like at-home screening test, which is no more difficult than just like Swiffering your house. And you could have a good understanding of like, is there even something here that I need to be thinking about at like a really low price point? And then after that, then you say, okay, do we need to like dive into inspection? Do I need to get further into this to diagnose what's going on or not? Right. So like there's easy ways to get into this, but the health stuff is interesting because of how it looks. And one last thing on this real quick is that um a lot of times you'll have like one person in the house who's really feeling it, and then like the other people aren't, or generally when you're talking like partners, right? Like one partner's feeling it, the other one isn't. They're both still decision makers, obviously, and what happens and how you spend your money and what goes on like that, right? And a lot of times, if one isn't feeling it, they'll be like, "Oh, well, this can't be the house because I would be feeling it too," right?
Don't understand how the mitochondria work.
No. So if that's happening for you, here's my response.
Mhm.
When was the last time that one of us just got sick and the other one didn't?
Right.
Oh, you mean there could be viruses or floating around that gets me sick and doesn't get you sick? Oh, that's a thing that can happen. Light bulb, that can happen here too, right? If that was the case, we would be sick at the exact same time, every single time, with the exact same symptoms, and our kids would have all the same things too. That is not how health works, right? And so a lot of times, like framing it like that help somebody like open their mind. They're like, oh, yeah, like our kids got sick at school and like maybe my wife also got sick, but I was feeling fine. Does that mean that my kids weren't sick? Does that mean that my wife wasn't sick?
Right.
No, it's just in your mind, you're okay with the idea of a virus, which, by the way, you can't see. I'm okay with an invisible virus making somebody sick because it makes more sense to me because I've heard it more often, as opposed to I'm not okay with an invisible environmental thing that I breathe in. By the way, they're both things you breathe in, virus, mold spores, mold top, whatever. They're both things you breathe in. I'm okay with one of them making my family sick and accepting the fact that I'm not sick, but acknowledging that they're not feeling good and helping them. But I'm not okay with the other one. It makes no sense, right? And sometimes framing it in a way where it contradicts their framework and their view on reality will actually change somebody's perspective because their subconscious is like, whoa, I was just proven wrong. And nobody's subconscious ever wants to be wrong. It
Right.
never wants to be wrong. So if you can give it proof that it is wrong, it will actually like shatter the construct it's created and open it to being open to something else.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things I think that can impact one person getting sick versus, I mean, my husband gets sick and I won't. Like, we'll sleep in the same bed, literally.
Mhm.
He could be on his freaking like deathbed, and I'm just like, I'm fine. And then advice, it'll flip, you know. I
Yep.
think there's so much that we don't understand about the human body from the lens of quantum biology, from the lens of exclusion zone water. Like, this is my, like, where I'm kind of nerding out right now and looking at like why we get sick. I think that we just know a little bit about it. We don't really know the full picture of why these things happen and why they impact people. But I do know that people are more prone to being impacted by things in their environment when the health of their mitochondria is less. They have less exclusion zone water, so they're more dehydrated on a cellular level, and they're just less of a defense, because that's what exclusion zone water does, is it excludes things from the cell to begin with. So if someone is coming to you depleted in that way, then they're going to have less defenses against these environmental things, quote unquote. So Yeah, there's so many different viewpoints with that, but I always tell people like I know the reason why my daughter is a little more susceptible to things is that her mitochondria are in need of major, major, major support. It's not the healthiest mitochondria. We're working on it, and she's getting a lot more resilient, but that's where you have to look. And so that's why I think you'll see one person get really sick and the other people are fine. So, and I think a lot of gaslighting happens that way as well. It's just like, yeah, there's a bucket, I think, in the body that gets
Yep.
full. So your bucket may have a ton more room than your husband's bucket and vice versa. So it's multifaceted, I think. But yeah, there's definitely in clients that I work with, it's usually the mom. It's usually the mom that is down for the count that's sick because she's got
Yeah.
the kids,
Yeah.
work, she's carrying a huge load and her body is less resilient, period. And so she's the one who's gotten sick because there's something in the environment that's causing her to have less resiliency. So yeah, I think that's definitely an important qualification. And one question I wanted to ask you, what's the difference between collecting dust? And I know that there's a lot of people out there saying that these are totally bunk, but the Petri dish test where you put a Petri dish out and see if it grows mold overnight. I've heard a lot of people say those are junk. Um, what's the difference between that and mold test, the way that you guys do it with the dust? And do you think the Petri dish is totally bunk as well?
So yes, the Petri dish, it does nothing.
Okay.
So I'll explain the difference. So what a Petri dish is, I'm sure we can imagine it's a circular thing and it has like some stuff in there, right? And so it's like it's all the pictures you see with mold growing in this circular dish, right? And so again, it's hard to visualize mold. So like when you look online, it's like all these pictures of things, right? Like that's how they do it. So here's the limitations of Petri dishes and like literally why I don't think that they should ever be used for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, they can only show spores that happen to land on the Petri dish, right? So I'm going to set this little, I don't know, 2 inch by 2 inch circle over here on this surface and just hope that whatever's floating around falls into this Petri dish.
Right.
What if it falls 2 feet over? What if it falls 3 feet over here? How many Petri dishes am I putting down? Am I running around and waving it around? Like, what am I doing with this thing? Right. So like your your capture zone is so tiny that it's not even a representative of what's going on first. The second thing is that there's like this gelatin solution in it, right? That's in it. That's the food source. Okay. So if a mold spore falls on it, you're literally giving it everything it needs to eat and grow, right? So it's going to grow. Now, the problem is there's always going to be some mold floating around in the house. But if you allow a mold spore to fall in here and then you give it like the ideal perfect world scenario for it to eat like a big fat king, it's going to grow and look really scary and gross. Of course it is, right? That's not
But
that's not necessarily indicative of like severe problems in the house. It just means you happen to got one spore that fell on this thing that's eating like it like royalty, right? Now, the other thing, and this is a really, really big difference, is mold spores can either be dormant or non-dormant. So if it's not dormant, if it's active, if it lands on something, it's able to grow, right? The majority of spores in a house are not are dormant, I should say. They're not active. They're not able to grow at the time, right? So like if the moisture runs out of a mold colony and like it's not there, then like spores off of there might not grow, right? Because it's, what's going on. So there's also fragments and pieces of colonies that break off that are not a spore specifically, and a fragment off of a colony can't grow because it's not a seed. Think of spores like a seed, but the fragments are not. And so what happens is like if you're only relying on that, there are studies that say that there are 500 times the amount of fragments that break off of a colony than the number of spores that break off of a colony. So if you're only looking for spores, you're looking for 1/500th of the total load that you might be breathing in. And only 1/500th of it is actually able to grow on something because the other 500 of them are not. They're just pieces of fragments that break off, right? So there's a lot of things in these Petri dishes, from like how much is it actually collecting to like the amount of growth that becomes misleading, to the fact that it's only identifying a teeny tiny percentage of what the problem is in a space. Even if you say that it's working, it's only looking at like potentially 1/500th of the problem that's in a space. They just are worthless, in my opinion. Then you
Yeah.
get into dust. So dust fixes all of those problems, right?
Mhm.
So first off, dust is an accumulation of whatever settled down on surfaces wherever the dust is. So when you're doing a dust collection, the way that you do it is you take a dust collection from multiple surfaces in different rooms of the house, right? So you're not only looking in like a 2 inch by 2 inch square or whatever the circle thing is. I'm wiping multiple surfaces throughout my entire house on a single sample. So I'm getting a much more broad representative sample of what's going on.
Mhm.
I'm also not waiting for things to fall on it. The dust collects things for a period of time. So I'm actually, when I do the dust collection, I'm getting what could be 4, 5, 8, 12, 30 months worth of buildup when I'm doing it, which is giving me a much better historical view of what's gone in the space and a more realistic understanding of what's been happening over the course of time. Now, the other piece of it is this particular type of testing will identify the 500 other fragments that a Petri dish won't. So what's
Mhm.
happening in a dust sample is you're actually doing DNA sequencing of the molds that are there. You're not growing something, you're not culturing something, because most mold isn't going to be grown or cultured because it's not ready to be, right? That doesn't mean when our body breeds it, it doesn't trigger an immune response. Like our body doesn't say, "Oh, this mold spore is active, so I'm going to be upset with this one." This one's not. Come on in. You're cool. What? No, our body sees it and it's like, this should not be here. Immune
Mhm.
response, right?
Right.
And so by doing PCR DNA sequencing, you're getting anything with the DNA signature, and you're actually getting a better understanding of the overall load of the different mold types that are there. So it fixes all of the problems of Petri dishes, and it does it all in a much better way. And then we talked about that human cloud that we create throughout a space. You're also now understanding this is what you're being exposed to, because the dust is what pops up in our face as we move through the house. So you're also getting like the quote air quality component of it that a local inspector would do an air sample in the house. You're getting that piece of it too, because we know the dust is what pops up and what we're exposed to. Apologies, sorry for that.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just I see a lot of people on social media now with these petri dishes, and I'm like, I don't think so. So that's helpful. So you're essentially saying people should, if they're worried, if they are having a concern, the best place to start would be with a dust test, correct?
Yeah, I think that's, if you have a general concern and any of this is landing, you're like, oh, symptoms, things, my one of us is feeling it, the other one isn't, whatever it is, that's like the easiest place to start, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of people that we work with who they're going to like a functional doctor, an integrative doctor, and they're
Right.
running labs that are already kind of validating a mold exposure issue. And at
Yeah.
that point, do you do a dust test or you just dive in?
Yeah.
Up to you at that point. A lot of times, or I will say this very confidently, anytime a doctor has referred someone to us, we find problems in their house.
Mhm.
Like if your doctor's telling you that there's something going on, I will, very short of 100% guarantee that there is something in your house that you're exposed to. Like it's very, like I can't even remember a time where someone came from a doctor where they either they saw inflammatory markers that were tied to things, or they actually ran mycotoxin tests, or they did the variety of different things that they're doing. They did note tests, they're seeing whatever's going on, and there's
Mhm.
like nothing happening in the house. Like that doesn't happen. Like, so if your doctor's telling you you have this stuff going on, sometimes people will do a dust test because they don't really believe it and they want to see something in the house. And if that's you, that's fine. Like you can do that. Just know that like they're right. If they're
Mhm.
showing it, they're right.
If they're seeing it in your labs, there's a
Yeah.
high probability of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you I was always told you could really only tell through like a Vibrant Labs test, like that one was the best one. But are there other markers or other blood tests, or is that something that you don't really deal with? You kind of refer out to practitioners to look at that kind of thing.
No, I mean, Not a doctor, obviously, so I'll say that. But there's a number of things that you can look at. I'll say this on the myco. So Vibrant Labs is a mycotoxin test. It's a urine mycotoxin test. So there's Vibrant, there's real time, there's Mosaic, which is another one. Those are kind of the three big ones. There is back and forth in the medical community on like how effective those are at determining a mold issue.
Definitely.
And there's a couple reasons for it. So first off, that's only mycotoxins. Okay.
Right.
So to define like what mold and mycotoxins are, because it's really important, mold is a living organism. A mycotoxin is a chemical that this organism can create. The chemical's meant to kill living things, so it's a toxic chemical. Our body doesn't only respond to one, it
Right.
responds to both. And
Yeah.
so a lot of times you can have people that have no mycotoxin issues, but they're still having severe mold exposure issues because they're getting all of the histamine, immune response, mast cell activation, all those things just from breathing in the particle and stuff, right? So mycotoxins are not the end all be all on whether or not there's an environmental mold trigger that's causing things. Now, when it comes to mycotoxins and you're doing the testing in your body, there's a couple things that go on. So mycotoxins are fat soluble, um, and they get into the cells and they specifically like to get into fatty tissue and stuff like that. So one thing, there's pieces of this. So your body is actually meant to detox stuff, right? There's methylation pathways, there's things that are built in place. Your body's supposed to get things out of your body, right? Problems we're
Yeah.
just exposed to a lot of stuff. You mentioned it earlier, mitochondrial health, your genetic makeup. There's like all these variables that then go into how effective you can detox yourself, how effective you can move things out. Some
Mhm.
people are really, really good mobilizers of toxins and other things, right? Meaning that it'll all move, right? So like me, for example, I I have been in many, many houses for a very long time and kind of tricked my body into thinking that I lived in a really moldy, unhealthy house because I was in all of them for everybody.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was going to one of the doctors who I worked with a lot of her patients, and she offered to see me and like help me out because I was helping, her patients out and stuff. And so she did a mycotoxin run on me, and I had three, but they were all like relatively low levels. And she's like, honestly, like I know the houses you're going into, and this looks great, like
Mm.
compared to the houses you're going into. This means that you mobilize really well. Let's just support you a little bit more and try to pull some of these out, but you're getting a lot of this stuff out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, other
There's
people,
the blood that you can look at too, right?
yeah, there's specific like mold antigen testing, so like IgG, IgA type testing you can look at. So there's kind of blood inflammatory marker tests you can look at. There's mycotoxin urine tests you can look at. There's like the organic acids test,
Yeah.
which is more of like a chemical type of test you can look at in the body to see certain things. But the mycotoxin piece, just to like wrap that up, the reason that it's so difficult to look at that and say yes or no is because you could have somebody who's so unable to mobilize anything
Mm.
that nothing will come out in their urine because
Mm.
their body can't get it out. So
Yeah.
they might be heavy, heavy toxic and their urine sample might be nothing. You might have somebody else, let's say like me, who mobilizes really well. And so
Mm.
maybe mine looks really high, but
Mm.
I don't actually have as like severe of a toxicity issue because I'm just pushing it out much faster, more frequently. Then
Yeah.
you have the doctors who say, well, I want to provoke my patient to excrete the mycotoxin before I test for it, meaning they're going to give you something to get it out into like the urinary path out. So they're going to give you essentially like a supplement or medicine or whatever that's going to make it all flood out. So you'll have a higher level. And then you'll have other doctors say, I don't want to do that. I want to see what's naturally coming out. There's
Mm.
so much variability in the urine mycotoxin testing that I actually know that there's doctors who are just like, they don't even do it anymore. They're
Yeah,
like,
I've heard that from people. Like with my daughter, we had done a ridiculous amount of blood testing and she had some markers for SIRS and
mm-hmm.
I can't even remember all the different, it was like 7 pages worth of stuff. So I don't want people, to just use one thing. I think you have to look at multiple and then look at your symptoms also. Um,
Absolutely.
Symptoms are more important than what's going to actually show up on a test as well. And that's what gets people pushed through is their doctor can't find anything. And yeah, there was a problem all along. Maybe we just couldn't isolate it on with a lab marker in particular, but yeah, there's a problem there. So I think that's important to throw out there for people if their doctor says, "Oh, the testing is normal, everything's fine." It's like, well, but you're still having all these problems. There's definitely an issue going on.
Yeah, I mean, most of your traditional doctors are going to say everything's fine because they're going to be running these basic tests
I kind of
that
know
don't really show this stuff,
in the first.
right?
Yeah, I don't know if you know Dr. John Kim. Um, he does a lot of mold stuff. He's in New Jersey,
Hmm.
but he's going to come on the podcast in I think a few weeks,
Oh,
and
cool.
he knows all this stuff, like because he had a heart attack when he was in his early 30s and found out the root cause of the heart attack was actually mold toxicity, and
Mm.
it turned him completely around and opened his eyes to this whole world of like, oh wow, this could be a trigger for something like a heart attack, even, which is not super common. Usually you get neurological issues, skin issues, gut issues, but for him it was a heart attack. So it's
Well, you know what's so interesting about that is, I mean, at its core, mold exposure is an inflammatory
right.
disease.
And it's like your body, depending on your genetic, your makeup, I think
Hmm.
it's going to do something different. For me, it may do something than what it did for my daughter,
Yep.
So
And like the top health issues are all like the big, metabolic issues, cardiovascular. It's all inflammatory driven. Like the inflammation is like low key the biggest killer of our entire race at this point because all of our diseases are rooted in inflammatory issues that then just manifest in different ways. And so being in a space that's every breath that you're taking is triggering inflammation responses is a huge thing that we need to be concerned about. A lot of times people, we don't think of it that way, right? But it's such an important component. You breathe 20,000 breaths a day, right? And that's every single breath that you're either triggering something or you're not triggered, like every single breath, you know. It's really, really important. And, I'm glad that there's more information and more people talking about it now because it's like such a huge component of overall health.
yeah, yeah, it really is. And I think that's important is like, I think it's when your body loses that ability to heal and repair and the cell becomes dysfunctional that we see all disease. I
Hmm.
always am like, let's stop being so reductionist about our health and it just zoom out. When the mitochondria is not working appropriately, you'll see a manifestation of inflammation, of the cancers, of the metabolic issues, all of them. It's just symptom that the mitochondria have become unable to make enough water and energy, ATP. So
Hmm.
we gotta look at it from that way, and that I think also brings people out of like the fear mindset of like, okay, we need to get back to these fundamentals of supporting your body at that level. Because it can be a really scary thing, when you start to see stuff like that happening with your health.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's just back it up. Someone has a health symptom and they're like, this is not making any sense. Obviously, allopathic medicine's not helping. They get a dust sample. What if they get the dust sample back? It says, oh, you definitely have an issue. Then what's the next step? An inspection, correct?
Yep, the next step is to figure out where it's coming from, right? So we can't fix something if we don't know where it's coming from. So the dust test becomes a high level screening test. Is there a problem? Is there not? The next step is then to dig in and say, where is the problem coming from? Is it many places? Is it not many places? Like how much is there? And then off of that, then you have a plan for like how you attack it, right? And so that's kind of how the two pieces work together if you kind of funnel in that way. And so at the end of the day, like that we inspect what we do is that, our goal is to find as much as we possibly can find, right? We're very good at finding things. We don't go into houses and not find things, right? So there's always something.
Yeah.
And so the idea is how many somethings are there? How severe are there? And then how can we focus on the areas that are the most severe to help you reduce that exposure as much as possible while balancing out the cost to achieve that, right? And so that's ultimately kind of, what we help people with.
Yeah, because that's the other thing is that, I've had some clients where the company has told them it's going to be $100,000 to remediate the home. And do you see that as a common thing, or do you think that a lot of people are being taken advantage of in this industry right now?
I think it depends on who you're working with. I actually think you're being taken advantage of more, frankly, by someone who comes in and says, this isn't going to cost much and I'm going to fog this and you're going to feel better. I
Mm-hmm.
think that that person is taking much more advantage of you than the person who comes in and says, "Hey, listen, there's the right way to do this, and this is what it looks like." Now, you could then have a conversation about if I can't do all of this, then how do I do some of it to like reduce things, right? And that is to me is a much more honest conversation. That's the opposite of taking advantage of someone. The thing with like our industry and even the remediation industry outside of inspections, but going to the other side is like looking at like the business models in a way. It's for a lot of companies, it's volume. And so at volume, you need to come in with solutions that you can duplicate really easily that don't cost a lot of money because if you're doing volume, your costs aren't, you're not charging as much, which means your margins have to be better. Like just think of it from a business perspective, right? Like if I'm going to come in and try to get as many people in as I can, then I can't be spending as much money to execute my solution if I'm trying to bring people in and using cost as the way to bring people in, like I'm cheaper, this is an affordable thing, you can do this, right? So when you kind of put all those pieces together, and this is what a lot of the whole like, I'm going to fog your house stuff, or I'm going to, these things, I'm telling you right now, anyone that's listening, if somebody comes in and sells you a fogging solution to fix your problems, kick them out of your door like immediately. It does not work. It doesn't work.
That's what Dr.
So
Me back when we were going through, because that's how I got in touch with him, was all the testing for my daughter. He's like, no fogging.
yeah, it's honestly like it's interesting because people when you look at like value and cost and like words like scams or these things that come up, a lot of times like we think towards like, well, where's the most money? That must be the scam,
Mhm.
right? And it's not necessarily that way. Like if you're going in to get surgery for something, you would want the best surgeon to come in. Like that's what you would want. You wouldn't want the guy on Yelp with 5 stars who has some weird way of doing it that's 80% cheaper. That's not who you want to like operate on your eyes or do an open heart surgery on you, right? Yet over here, if it costs more, it's like, oh, that must be a scam. I think the scam is local inspectors telling people that there's no problems in their house because they're doing air samples in the middle of the room with a 78% false negative. I think that's a scam on people. I
Yeah.
think remediators coming in and saying they're going to fog your house and fix all your problems, I think that's a scam on people because what happens, it makes the person think that there's no problem or the problem has been fixed. And then their health continues to be a problem. And then whatever doctor they're working with, their doctor is still telling them, like, no, there's a problem here because they're going to keep seeing it. And the person's like, no, I had so and so out and they said it was handled. And then what ends up happening is they leave their doctor. They don't
Yeah.
trust their doctor anymore. Then they go try to find another doctor. And the fact that you're trusting like, 4-star Yelp guy over your functional doctor who you put all this research into and you go find a mold inspector in a week and you bring them in and now you're shifting your entire health plan over the course of however long you've been doing it because you think that this one thing is like the end all is crazy. It's crazy, right? So I've seen this happen. I've seen people who have come in, they've had a bad inspection, then they're sick longer. Then they go find a new doctor, and the doctor's like, no, you still have something. Then they go and they get a second inspection. And that inspector, guess what? They find a little more. Why do they find a little more? Because they were told that somebody else came out and didn't find anything the first time. So now the second one feels like they have to find something. So they point to something and say, this is the problem. All you have to do is maybe cut out this little section of the wall and we're going to fog your house. And then finally, the person's like, oh, I finally figured out what the problem is. That's great. And then they keep not feeling good again. For me, the scam is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your health being not improving. That's the scam. You don't get
Agree.
that time back. Like that time's gone. It's
Mm-mm.
gone. So I would prefer to have it done the right way and then to be really focused on how do we attack this stuff and how do we balance out budget with impact when we know the full scope and the full field of what's going on in front of us, as opposed to coming in and just like half-assing these solutions and rotating through clients. Like, oh, cool, we sent them a fog. Good, we're done. Great, go into the next person. Hey, you got this. We're going to fog you. And then they'll be like, hey, you should fog every 3 months. Now they put you on a freaking fogging subscription plan. It is crazy. It's crazy. Sorry, I just went off. I'm sorry.
Oh, because that's like I said, I think this thing is, it's like the boogeyman and people are super scared of it. And then you've got a lot of predatory companies out there, which I really dislike because I've been in that situation with my daughter having really major health issues. And when you get in that situation and you see your kid suffering, it's like, I'll do anything, you know? And so I want people to have all the information so they can really evaluate things and make their best decision for themselves and their families. I think that's what's really, really key. And so this is why I'm like, these kind of conversations are really important so people can know what to look for and what to have. Like, that's a major red flag. Um, so yeah, I appreciate the thoroughness with about all of that for sure.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you having me on and having some time to chat about it too.
Absolutely. So obviously you guys have uh testing, ways that people can do that. Like, is it nationwide? Can people anywhere get this testing, or are you limited to certain areas? What does that look like?
Yeah, so there's two pieces. So the dust test is an at-home test kit. So that's that dust collection kit. Literally can go anywhere. You just go to thedusttest.com and you can order it. So that one's really easy. And then We Inspect, which is our inspection company. We service the whole country. Yes, weinspect.com. You can set up a free phone call with us, talk through your situation, see if we feel like there's something there that you need to, that we might be able to help you with, and then talk about what that looks like. But yeah, we built the business to be able to help people everywhere because frankly, you shouldn't be limited by your local Yelp page if you're sick. And I've always felt that way. And so I want to make sure that we can help people wherever we can.
Definitely. Well, I'll make sure to have all that down in the show notes. And anything else you think people need to know that maybe we didn't touch on today that's important?
I don't think so. I think the big thing is like just the health piece of it. I've seen many, many people get better, right? I know it feels daunting at first if you feel like this is something that's going on, but it works.
Yeah,
Like there's just client after client after client who's so thankful they go through this process. Like they're feeling better. They finally are getting to where they need to go after however much time beforehand where they weren't seeing the progress. And this really was like a key driver of what's going on. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It does work. It does get better. And, you know, try not to be uh, apprehensive or scared about kind of exploring the path, I would say, because at the end of the day, um, if you're surrounded by the right people and you're getting the guidance that you need, that anxiety and the apprehension is curbed along the way, and you can get the direction you need to handle things in the right way.
definitely. Well, great. I'm excited to share this episode with everyone. And anyone watching you or listening, you can just head down to the show notes and we'll have all the links for you. And yeah, thanks, Brian, for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Evolving Wellness Podcast. Just a quick little reminder, this is not medical advice nor meant to be taken as a substitute for working one-on-one with a healthcare practitioner. And if you enjoy the show, please head on over to Apple or Spotify to leave the show up to a 5-star review. If you're over on YouTube, please leave us a like, leave us a comment. I really appreciate you for being here, for listening to the show, and your support means the world to me as I continue to try to pull guests from around the world to bring you informative content to empower you to make decisions about your own health. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.